And first is just to give some background and some context to the bill. And Prof, we've not prepared anything, you and I, specifically to go through. So please chip in at any point in time as we go through this. And then to just discuss the actual process that the bill will follow to get to the point that it becomes an act. And then, Prof, if we can also just talk a little bit about, once it's enacted, the process to the point that it is effective. Because we can't see this like the instruction, the infamous instruction that came out last year, which was issued on the 31st of March and effective on the 1st of April. So we've got to understand that effective period. Any points of interest on the update that is out, and then some points on getting involved going forward. Is that okay as an agenda for our discussion?
Perfect with me.
Great, thank you. So, folk, just some background on the bill. A draft of the bill, the Public Procurement Bill, let's just be sure that we get the name correct. The draft of the Public Procurement Bill was issued in February 2020 for discussion from whoever wants to contribute. It was actually issued as a discussion document. There was a period that was given, and people were then invited to provide comments, and many did. We did on this platform. I know Prof Geo and those at his African Procurement Law Unit and others were involved in providing that feedback. And that kind of went quiet for some time, and then it ended up at NEDLAC last year, and in October last year, the NEDLAC process concluded, and there was a version that was issued at that point after the NEDLAC discussions. And things have been fairly quiet since then. And lo and behold, late in March and in April, a version of the bill appeared. In fact, Prof, it was reported at the workshop that you held in March, I think it was March, that they had got the various certificates that are needed from
yes.
So who's that? The legal folk that
say
this is constitutions, state attorney.
Yeah, the state law advisor's office. Yeah, so it was right at the end of Feb, yes, when we had that meeting, and the OCPO reported at that workshop that they've literally that prior week received the final sign off, both from the state law advisors and in terms of the socioeconomic impact assessment that had to be done. And both of those they've received, which then usually would mean that the bill or the draft bill would then be ready to go to cabinet.
And that we understand is where it is. And the version that was issued is, and I'm just going to loosely call it the cabinet version. It's not quite clear whether the cabinet have signed that off yet, because the version that's going around has still got some edits to it. But there is a version that is being discussed at the moment by the OCPO with various stakeholders. And they've had discussions with the DGs, and there's a planned discussion with treasuries tomorrow. That's where we are. It's not been formally issued, but it's going to go from this place, and eventually it will be tabled at Parliament. Is that right, Prof?
That's correct, yes. So, I mean, the little bit uncomfortable space we are as we're talking now is that there's this version floating around. We don't quite know exactly what the status is, because as you've correctly said, it's not been formally issued by anyone. So but it is very widely being circulated. I mean, I myself have received it from half a dozen different sources. So so it is clearly floating around, but of course the danger is that clearly the internal engagements are still being done at the moment, and it might be that there might be tweaks based on those engagements. So I think one should be just mindful of whatever version you're looking at the moment, that would not necessarily be the version that would eventually be tabled either in cabinet or then more importantly in Parliament, which is when we will actually formally, at the latest, if not earlier, then at least when it's tabled in Parliament, that's when we will formally see what the at that stage it will become a bill. But if not before that, the draft bill then looks like. What is the final version of this thing that Treasury proposes to put through the parliamentary process? I think before one gets to Parliament, I think the cabinet process itself is a critically important one, because I'm not sure to what extent this draft bill has been thoroughly and at the highest level discussed in the national government space yet. And I think since we started, well, let me revise that. Not since we started, because we've been working on this for between 8 or 6 years, depending on what you count as the starting point. But at least since this version that we now see really started being engaged with, and that was early 2020, there's been a lot of development in this space, both in terms of just procurement, our experience. I think a lot of people's taken note that might in early 2020 have been completely ignorant with no interest in procurement. I think COVID and a few other things that's happened since has made us all very aware and sensitive to procurement. So I think that's the first very interesting point for me from a policy mandate perspective, that I think that there might be a few, let's call them policy owners, if you like, outside of the National Treasury space that might be keenly interested to look at what is going on in this bill and how is it going to impact on us. So I think the presentation, which I understand also, and I also stand to be completely corrected, but I understand that there was on the 2nd of May a presentation to the Directors General. I think that in itself to me is a very interesting event, and I would have loved to be a fly on the wall to hear what was said. But perhaps even more interestingly, I would have been very interested to hear what happened in individual departments, in individual DG's, management leadership teams around this thing. Because just to give you one example, I would be very keen to hear what the National Department of Health is thinking about all of this. Because we must remember that the linkages between this regime, this general public procurement regime, and the national health insurance is massive. Yeah. And I'm not sure that anyone has really thought through that linkage before. But we are now suddenly finding ourselves in a space where both of those, major regulatory overhauls, policy and regulatory overhauls, the procurement one and the national health insurance one, are reaching finalization. Because we must remember, this parliament is coming to an end next year. You can't carry over in our parliament from one to the next. There is a national health insurance bill alive before parliament at the moment. So National Department of Health has got every incentive to see this through in the current parliament. And just if we just think about national health insurance as just an example, if we adopt that approach to public health, it'll mean that basically all health services in the country will be procured by the state. Everyone. Forget about the public-private distinction in health. That will largely disappear. It will all become public. Which means that all of that will become, at least notionally, subject to procurement. Every single time you go to the GP that is going to be covered by national health insurance, that will be an instance of procurement. because the government is paying.
Mm.
Now, as the NHI in the UK and other countries with similar systems have learned, that's a tough nut to crack, right? It's a difficult thing. So just as one example, I'll be very interested to see what health thinks of this and how this may or may not align with what they've got in mind. And then one can think about a whole lot of others. Defense is another key area. They've had very bad experiences with procurement over the last 2-3 years. I think the secretary will be very interested. And if you've lost me there, we're just going out of load shedding. And again, a great example. Be very interested to hear what the new Minister of Energy, Electricity, thinks about this bill. It'll have a huge impact on all his plans. So Scott, Sean, I'll be very interested to hear, even before we get to Parliament, what's the policy take on this thing? To what extent is it allowing other role players to deliver on their mandates, bearing in mind that I think there's a greater understanding now that procurement is going to be, or is, of course, the engine room of a lot of those deliveries on mandates. And I think that penny, has dropped. My experience, at least, engaging with senior people in all levels of government, is that over the last 2 years, that penny has really dropped for a lot of people. They now understand that we need procurement to work to be able to do all the other things that we need to do. So I think there's a particular interest. And I mean, I want to absolutely follow your lead and not comment on this version that I've received, apart from just, comity in terms of OCPO, but also just because I just don't know what version I'm looking at. And because as you've noted, I mean, the versions that I've seen has got edits in them. So clearly this is not a final, sorry, let me just start my video again.
Sure.
So I'm reluctant to comment on the actual content, but I mean, even if we just talk about the NETLAC version, right, which has been formally put into the public space by NETLAC, if I'm one of these other DGs, I would be concerned, because I think that there are questions. So I think that's a very interesting phenomenon. And then, of course, at cabinet itself, because one would then imagine that these DGs would be talking to their ministers. They would be saying to the minister, no, when this thing comes up in Parliament, you need to raise the following things. And we also know that in South Africa, our cabinet is an interesting structure, just given the politics, etc. There's, it's not. We're not one of those systems where all cabinet members just toe the same line. We know that there are tensions and there are different views on things. So it'll be very interesting. I think just this first stage before we get then to Parliament, which we can talk about, and that's a whole different ballgame, of course. But I think the stage where we are in at the moment is a really interesting one. And it'll be quite interesting to see between now, the version that we now know is being workshopped, and eventually something appearing in Parliament, to see what's happened, if anything. And I think that in itself, those changes might tell a very interesting story about the national view. And when I say national, I don't just mean national level of government, South African public sector view. And then we've not even started talking about provinces, because again, that's a completely different world. I mean, we know that there's been a number of provinces where procurement has received quite a bit of attention over the last few years. I think that there are many provinces now that are actually in a lot of practices ahead of most national entities, most national departments. I think that there are best case studies at provincial level, that I think might be worthwhile looking at. So if I just think again of an example, KwaZulu-Natal's experiment for a number of years now with dispute resolution, I think is at the moment the best one we've got in South Africa. It'll be very interesting to see what KwaZulu-Natal thinks about this new regime that this bill is going to bring, and that's going to replace theirs, right? It's going to completely replace theirs. And they're the only ones with the experience. So if anyone is going to tell us something meaningful about how do you make an administrative structure work dealing with disputes, it's KwaZulu-Natal, because they've now got the experience. So again, I'll be very keen to see what the impact is. And then we can go on. There are other provinces with other kind of very interesting experiments that I think will bring a lot of experience to bear on the text, and then trying to understand, where is this going? So it's an interesting space. And then, then of course we can talk about the parliamentary process.
Prof, just the process they're going through now is interesting, because it's not necessarily a planned or envisaged process. Do you think that there's a chance OCPO is testing the water and might actually decide at the end of this process that they're going through? I'm not sure if they're consulting, if they're just informing, if they're actually receiving feedback. And we were asking this in the context of the province's discussion, which is due tomorrow.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of people online today who will be in those discussions tomorrow.
Yeah.
And might actually say, hey, it's just not the right time, because it's time is short. This parliament probably actively ends towards the end of this calendar year.
Yeah.
We've got elections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you're spot on. And I'm on record in NEDLAC having really resisted this process. Sadly, I've been completely ineffective in that forum. But I agree with you there. I think time is just too short. I don't understand the rush. I really don't. And we can talk about this a little bit later, Sean, when we talk about, what's next? When will this thing actually hit the shelves? And I think that is then the
So just saying we're losing you there, Prof, and I'm not sure if it's just my side here, but I think it might be on your side. So I'm just going to briefly just share a slide now, if I may.
Going to be the most important tool that we are going to put in place.
It's massive.
Yes, it's massive. It's going to determine everything. Absolutely.
PFMA, MFMA, triple PFA. Integrating some interesting perspectives on the role of the minister and CIDB as well, and the draft that they're discussing. But that whole, it's a politically very important as well. It's.
And politically, if we talk politically at the moment, and I'm no political scientist, I'm a mere lawyer, but I find it very interesting that politically this is receiving. Well, I'm assuming, right? I want to know, but and that's again why cabinet will be very interesting. It might be that the bureaucrats are driving this, but the politicians not, because from a political point of view. For the governing party, I'm not sure that this is such a clever move ahead of a highly contested election, because the one thing that is clear from both the 2020 version and the NEDLAC version is that local government is going to lose a lot of power. If you think about a redistribution of power in terms of procurement, the loser is local government, because that power is basically going to be taken away completely from councils. Now, you and I, and a lot of people on this call might think that that's a great idea, looking at the track record of, dare I say, most municipalities. Let's just be honest about it. And you don't have to believe me. Go and read the AG's reports. We might think it's a good idea, but politically, of course, that's a difficult sell. That is giving the opposition a stick to say, we see what's going on here. Conversely, if you're the governing party at the moment and you are not sure that you are going to be firmly in control of the national levers anymore, this is also not politically a wise thing to do. So it's politically also a very strange thing to push at the moment. My own preference would have been that we take this time and we properly go through proper processes, not a process that starts, stops, pauses for 2 years, then something comes up that we don't know. I mean, we understand that there's been 4,000 submissions in 2020, but between May 2020, when the comments closed, and basically second half, about June, July 2022, when we saw that first NETLAC process, and then only formally towards the end of last year, September, October, when NETLAC formally released their report, did we see any movement. We still don't know those 4,000 comments that a lot of us, and I'm sure I would guess probably everyone on this call, spend a lot of time and energy doing. We're still not sure how those comments impact and how it got us to where we are now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, I think, in my view, unsatisfactory engagement around something that I would consider to be critical, and I would certainly want to see a much more thorough engagement with the sector itself. So I would have preferred that we use this time, that is the rest of this year, all of next year, to go through a proper process and really, you know, through a collaborative process, design a new procurement system for ourselves with all of it included, not just a draft text bill, but also a set of regulations, also the standard operating procedures that will have to go with it, the standard documents. Let's do all of it. Let's discuss all of it so that we can have that opportunity to move between the instruments. And then, as the first matter of business for a new parliament, submit the bill.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been, in my mind, a neater, you know, way, a more structured. It would have allowed all entities that will have to go through a lot of effort once this new regime starts taking shape to adjust everything that they've been doing. It would have allowed everyone the time to do that, to think about the systems, for example. If you just think about the central supply database, will it have to change? Probably, because there's going to be new metrics, there's going to be new thresholds, there's going to be new preferences. That's not something that happens overnight.
Of interest is Treasury are giving an update to the Finance Standing Committee on systems, including e-procurement, today as we speak.
So again, it's not aligned. We also know that there's an MFMA, a major MFMA overhaul coming. So again, how is that going to align with this process?
So, Prof, if we can assume that this is going to move forward, let's just reflect a little bit on that process of going through Parliament, because many of us will recall what happened with the preferential procurement regulations, which went through fairly quickly through some process, and you know, and eventually it was November that we had a bill that was enacted. We had regulations that were enacted. This is going to be different.
Yes.
Right. This is a process where the bill is introduced then to National Assembly. It then is assigned to a portfolio committee, and I'm not sure which one that is. Do you know who that would be?
It would be Finance.
Probably Finance.
Yes.
Note, this is from Parliament's diagram themselves. Note they'll actually then gazette, won't they? They'll gazette. This is the version now.
Yeah.
And
the
there
bill,
will
yeah.
be a public participation process at that point.
Yeah. So just as a starting point, Sean, and this is a very nice visual. So first off, this will be a so-called Section 76 bill, undoubtedly. So the difference just between 75 and 76, and these refer to sections in the Constitution. These are just two different processes, and it wholly depends on whether the bill, the act, will affect provinces or not. This one undoubtedly does. There's no question about it.
For sure.
So this will be a 76 bill. So it'll have to go through, I mean, as we are looking at it, the right-hand side of the picture, which is important because it means that the provinces and the NCOP play a much larger and determinative role in the passing of the enactment. Perhaps also just a bit of terminology. A lot of people are struggling with the terminology. So something only becomes a bill once it's tabled, right? So the moment it starts its life in Parliament. Before then, it's a draft bill. And the bill, of course, is a draft act. So that's the three different terms we use. It's a draft bill. That's the thing that we see at the moment. It becomes a bill the moment it enters Parliament, and it only becomes an act once the president has actually signed off. And then the fourth important thing to remember in terms of process is that even if the president has signed off, it's become an act. It's not yet necessarily in operation. There's then a further step. It might be or it might not be, but then the act itself will tell us. Now, in this case, again, undoubtedly, this act will not come into operation at the moment the president signs it, and that is simply because on all versions we know that this is just going to be a framework piece of legislation. The actual operative parts are largely going to be in regulation. So those regulations will have to be made first before the act can be put into place, and the regulations themselves have to follow a parliamentary process. So I think that's just the important kind of the
Yes, so very, very important. It's not going to be enacted and then effective straight away. There's going to be a time frame between there. So just waiting then for Prof's connection to come back. And with load shedding at the stage it is, we're having a lot of issues with connectivity across the country. And so there you can see, and our understanding is, although this is a Section 76 bill, it will probably go through National Assembly first. And from that point onwards, then it will then go through, and there will be this public participation process that will happen. Ingrid, do you want to come in there? I see you've raised your hand. Welcome back.
Sorry, just a question in terms of the regulations. Can we say that regulations have now been dealt with? In other words, all we're going to move on to now is the act and the bill.
Are you asking in the context of the preferential procurement regulations 2022? And I think the answer to that would be no. That there will be a completely new set of regulations once.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, completely new.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about dropping out there. I don't know. No, electricity is very unstable today here. Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I think it's worth perhaps just stating that this bill, once it's passed, once it's put into operation, will take everything away on procurement law, whether it's in statute, regulation, or even instruction. That's a very important point. All of it will disappear, completely, fully disappear, and will be replaced by this new regime. So it is a cleaning house exercise, yes.
And it's PFMA, triple PFA, and MFMA. And
at least a whole host of others as well, CIDB Act, CETA Act,
there's a
The old state the old State Tender Board Act, I see, will now finally be repealed. But there's a whole host of other statutes that will be impacted as well. And then very importantly, you know, that I think perhaps, as I think most practitioners on this call will know, the most significant impact is all those downstream instruments, right? All the frameworks and the guidelines and the instructions and the circulars and importantly, the SEM policies. Because remember, those SEM policies that we've got across the country, that, you know, 900 and how many of them, they draw their status from the PFMA, MFMA on the one side and the triple PFA on the other. The moment you repeal those sections, those SEM policies also fall away.
So there will be a process then to restart the policy at an institutional level.
At everything. It's a complete rewrite of our entire regulatory regime. And with it, all the systems.
Ingrid, you're covered.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask here,
Sure.
Act 53, the BEE regulations and the BE Act is completely independent or not?
Yeah, that's the one that won't be touched. And Ingrid, I think that's one of the
interesting.
Really, I didn't want to say anything about it, but I think that's one of the most interesting interactions, and I'll be very interested to hear what DTIC and the BE Commission say about all of this, because this thing can't touch their regime, but the linkages must be there, and they've never been aligned, right? We all know they've never been aligned, and again, that's why I'm very keen to see what comes out of cabinet, because I'll be very interested to hear what Minister Patel has to say. And remember, it's not just the BE part; it's the localization. Patel will probably have more to say about localization. So that's the one that they won't touch, and that's going to be a very difficult balancing act to do. I would suspect that it will be done in regulation, not at the level of the act. I think the only question would be, does the act or the bill allow enough space for both those two policy environments to come together and give us, you know, a new set of regulations about how to deal with preferencing going forward? So I think that's going to be the interesting question. And then, of course, we all know, following the Agribusiness case, that there are major constitutional questions there as well, and we'll have to see. And I think that will call for serious debate in Parliament itself, but certainly also in that public participation process that you've got on the screen, because those parties that went to court in Agribusiness, as well as everyone else that had an opinion about it, you know, whatever side of that line you're at, they will be screaming and shouting in that public participation like you won't believe it. And there are real constitutional questions there. I mean, we all struggle to understand what 2172 really means. And that will have to be squared. And, you know, depending on the outcome of that process, I would say that litigation is not out of the picture.
The version I've seen is suggesting changes to the Act, the Triple BE Act, specifically 9 and 10. Kamogelo Mampane, welcome, sir. You've raised your hand.
Yes, no, thanks. Morning, everyone.
Good morning, lovely to have you with us.
No, not a problem. Look, I think it's high time that these two pieces of legislation are able and allowed and given space to operate in the country without causing any conflict or confusion. They serve two different purposes, and there is no reason why this was not harmonized many months ago. So I think Parliament has now an opportunity public procurement has a very specific purpose, and it must stick to its purpose. BEE has a very specific purpose. It must stick to its own purpose. And we've tried in the past to use procurement to achieve what BEE is achieving, and that will always create a confusion. So it's a good thing that we are almost starting and pressing a restart button. It's a very, very good thing. There are serious issues, even with the current public procurement bill, serious issues which we believe should not even be in the bill or in an act. It's more administrative. They don't even belong in a policy. It's things that belongs in a procedure, which are going to create, and I fully agree that I think the lawyers are going to have fun litigating, because you probably can litigate, you know, using every single page of the current bill. I'm really hoping that what we took out for public comments is not going to be, probably not even 50% of it should be in the final bill. But I just wanted to say that yes, there are changes that are taking place in the BEE Act, but we're starting first, obviously, with the strategy, because the strategy has to be amended, and once it's out on public, the alignment will take place, and the mining charter. So there's all these other things that needs to be aligned and be regrouped. So we are happy that you know, the South African government is, you know, pressing a restart button. There's going to be fights, serious fights in Parliament, but let it be. We have to learn somewhere, and we are looking forward for that process as well. Thanks, and
thanks, Kamogelo.
I think, Sean, that those are really you know, very keen insights, because I think at the heart of the comment that I wholly agree with is that it's long overdue that we have Parliament, you know, our elected representatives at a formal national level, take a position. You know, we can't, whether we like it or not is a different question. But what we can't do, and I think we can all agree on that, is we can't have this bumbling along, you know, make it up as we go. We've got a problem here, we patch it, then another problem. You know, it's not a sustainable, organized, structured way of achieving so much that must be achieved by procurement. So I'm also very pleased that at least there's some movement, because I agree that the only way we're going to move forward is for us as a nation to take a position, and that we do in Parliament. That's what Parliament is for. And I might not like it. There might be things coming out of it that I would disagree with, but that's neither here nor there. The important point is that we have those debates, discussions, and then take a decision, and then say, this is how it's going to be. And then we can move forward. I mean, that's the other important thing. People too often think that once you've got a law, or once you've got a regulation, or once you've got an instruction, it's all done, problem solved. You know, that's just silly. That's just the start. You've not really done anything. You've just provided the basis to actually do the work. The actual work happens after you've drafted the statute or the regulation or the instruction. And I mean, as I've said at that workshop we had in Feb as well, that my biggest concern is that this preliminary step, which is just a precondition, is holding everything else up. We're not seeing systems being developed. We're not seeing proper standard operating procedures. We're not seeing really good standard documents emerging. They are there. We know that they are there, but they're not at scale being introduced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's because we are forever stuck at this preliminary stage. So I fully agree. I think this is an important opportunity. That's why I want us to get it right in terms of process. And then, yes, let's then start to do the real work and actually implement something that that can work for us.
Thanks, Prof. I know that we need to wrap up by 11. Let's talk a bit about how people can participate in the dialogue going forward. But if you wouldn't mind, I did invite the provinces just to quickly
please
provide some input. I see Sanele has raised his hand. Hi, Sanele, all the way from KZN. Welcome.
Good day, good morning, colleagues. How are you?
Have you had a chance to see
Morning.
the draft that's going around?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. I was actually very surprised when I was trying to browse on this document. Reminds me of the comments I've made on the initial one. On the initial document, I made a comment asking the colleagues, where do we feature supply chain management in this document? Obviously, understanding that I think this document now is as a result of 217. And if you look at supply chain, it's as a result of 216. And it just finds itself there. And you're trying to make a link, if you I think it's always good to hear from Prof, because you'll get the scholar's view on the matter. And if you look at this document, the previous document, there's a lack of link. Where do we link supply chain in all of this discussion? And I see now there's a complete removal of supply chain, and it's good, but at the same time it makes you worry, because what Prof is saying is actually the case. That I think we do need to start the process. We need to get it going, but I think we really need right time to deal with this process, because it does seem like there are people who will contribute to this. They put this, and then later when this thing gets challenged, they can't defend it and no, remove it. More similar a case like the ESCOM exemption, but it's very dangerous now, because it's in the landmark document, which may be here with us for more than 20 years or so.
Yeah.
So it always worries one. So if you see such document, I was looking at one of these definitions that are here, one of the bid committees, and I was like, this definition shouldn't be like this. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm looking based on what is happening on the ground. I think this document was borrowed from the Guide for Accounting Officer, which really does not translate to what is happening on the ground. So if you look at what's happening on the ground, you would want to change this definition of bid committees completely. But I do wish that this document could receive, right attention. I think the team that is working on this document, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, but for the lack of a better word, they need to beef it up maybe and try to get people who will be able to give us the right document. I would be interested in that question of how do we participate as people who are in the National Treasury, so that we can be at least part of this process and assist wherever we can. Yeah, thanks, John.
Good ones. And I'm not sure that Treasury necessarily want to start a new consultation process with all stakeholders. I mean, we've got to get to the point that it's tabled and let the real discussion then start happening. I see that Akert Fiemelen is here all the way from Northern Cape. Akert, any comments from your side? I believe you've had a chance to scan it, although you've not yet engaged with Treasury on it. And I don't want to put you on the spot. I think this is your first time that you're joining us there.
No, Sean, thanks, and also morning, colleagues. Now, I've received it as it is from the forum that was supposed to sit yesterday on it and discuss around it. And as I was reading through it, I could just get a sense it was and the colleagues have said it's very broad. Yeah. I think also Prof mentioned the fact that, and it was a bit surprising to find them in the chapter there that speaks about general provisions and how many regulations. That list is very long of regulations that actually has got to now be developed, and in and out through the document, the whole almost reconfiguration of the SCM system that's going to have to happen, and rewriting of all of these things. And for me, initially, when I was looking at it, just looks like kind of a very mammoth task. There's still ahead of us lying. It's a mountain to climb still, and I just thought, for me, it looked very broad. And the question I still had that in there, those regulations, and it was mentioned earlier when we look at public consultation, when will we come to the point and say, but these other points that we are again overreaching now, where organs of states have to then make their own policy. So for me, that thing just looks a little bit, for me, that is a bit unclear. Where do we stop now with that and saying we are issuing all these regulations? But in general, I was keen and quite was waiting for that meeting to happen. Unfortunately, it was now going to take place tomorrow. Hopefully, after that one, we'll have a better idea. But Sean, in general, that was my
Thanks, Socket.
assumption and my feeling that it's so huge and broad and so much work still to be done there. Thanks, man.
Good one. Appreciate it. Thanks.
And I think Sean, that point that Ockert has made is a very important one, also for one of the points that we wanted to make generally, and that is that this bill, even if it passes through Parliament and lands as an act, there's, as Ockert says, a very large amount of work still to be done before we are anything near implementation. And I certainly share that concern. I've now long given up that we're going to get an act that's going to tell us. I've now just resigned myself to the fact that it's going to be all in regulations. So at the moment, my pure focus is on, one, making sure that the bill itself does not straitjacket us in a particular way without us realizing it and having that discussion now. And I'll give you one example. All the versions of the bill, including the latest one that I've seen, says nothing in the bill itself about procurement methods. It leaves it to regulations.
Yes.
Including, and everyone from all procuring entities now should really keep their ears open, including transversal contracting. Not a word in the bill on it, but then in the regulations, in the power to make regulations, it says that the minister must make regulations on mandatory participation in transversal contracting. Now, that's a very sneaky way of saying in the bill that transversal is going to become mandatory, which is, of course, a big shift from where we are at the moment, right? And that's the kind of thing that concerns me, because are we seeing that at the moment and then having a conversation? Because we need to have that conversation now. You know, we need to have the conversation about, do we think mandatory transversal contracting is the way to go in the future? That's a major policy decision. And that's a question that we need to engage each other with in the sector. And that engagement needs to happen now before we get to regulations, because if the bill is passed in this format, when we get to the regulations, we start writing procedures and we come to transversal, then, you know, our hands are tied. We can't then say, you know, do what we got at the moment, that an accounting officer can pick whether they want to participate in transversal or not. So those are the kind of things that I'm focusing on at the moment. And I think the other thing that Ockert has made a very important point, and I agree with him, it's also not clear to me, and that's a major concern to me, is what is the public participation process going to be like for making the regulations, right? So we know that there's going to be very thorough public participation in the parliamentary process to make this bill. Parliament must, right? They've got no choice. They must go through proper consultation. So all of us will get a proper opportunity to engage with Parliament on this bill. But that's not true for regulations.
Yeah, it doesn't say.
And that's my concern. Will we get adequate engagement from, if not the whole public, at least the role players? And again, you know, one of the speakers made that very important point that we need to get the people on the ground who's doing this on a daily basis to sit around a table and tell us, this is not going to work. It's a great idea, but it's not going to work. And it's not going to work for the following reasons. It's the only way, I believe, that one can draft a proper system. And unless we insist on that, unless we say in this instrument that there needs to be proper consultation, we're not going to get it, right? We're going to have what we've had up till now, where instruction is issued out of the complete blue. We don't know where it comes from, and then it's implementation within a week. And we all know it can't be done, and then we need to scramble, and we don't want that, right? So those are the two things I think in terms of process forward that I would certainly want us to
Prof, quick one from Santi Roy, all the way Western Cape, Department of Health.
Hi there,
Welcome,
thank
Santi.
you, Prof. How are you both? If you're well.
Good.
Hi, Santi.
Hi. I wanted to pick up on Prof's point about transversal contracting. This is a subject very near to our hearts in Western Cape Health, because we put a lot of provincial contracts in place for two reasons. One, because many of the existing transversal contracts that are put in place by the National Treasury don't actually have the full scope of requirement that we need. And secondly, because some of the contracts that are put in place by National Treasury simply aren't fit for purpose. And there are a number of different reasons for that. So I'm not going to go into the breadth of those reasons, because I think most participants understand, why a contract wouldn't be appropriate. But I think we need to also be mindful of the knee-jerk reaction that comes out when we critique transversal contracts. And that is that, I'm going to play devil's advocate, National Treasury is struggling to put effective transversal contracts in place because they don't have the staff or the competence. So it is a natural outflowing of that statement to say, well, if the bill or the regulations are going to require the transversal contracting as mandatory, that resources would be put in place for such transversal contracts to become more effective. So that's a natural conclusion to make. And the natural next step is that resources would potentially be drawn from provinces that have the competence to supplement National Treasury's competence. So, there's a lot of inferences one can make. But my counter to that point is the scope of transversal contracting would obviously increase drastically, the scope and number of transversal contracts. As soon as you make something mandatory, you're obviously making it a strategic enabler. And we need to look at simple contracts that have been in place for many years that are currently completely ineffective. Not look at the new ones that the Treasury is trying to put in place to enhance an existing strategy. And the two examples I want to give you are the RT70 contract for the supply of fuel, which is completely ineffective in the majority of cases where facilities need to buy fuel to run a generator in a volume of less than 1,000 litres in anywhere that isn't Gauteng. Because I think the majority of my colleagues across the province, across the country would agree most of our facilities are not in urban areas, and most of those facilities do not have giant diesel storage tanks. So there is a current electricity supply crisis. It's not been there for 5 minutes, it's been there for a number of years, and yet this very simple commodity is ineffectively being procured. So it speaks to a lack of connection with what is on the ground versus what the strategic enabling party is trying to do. But again, that's an example that we can work with. We can, with good people on the ground, we can work to rectify that. So the other example I want to give of where transversal contracting, and maybe we can call it centralized procurement, is wholly ineffective, and this is the real example that I think we need to guard against, is CETA. I mean, how long has CETA been in place? And I think, again, we're very grateful for the work that CETA does. It's not that they're not trying to do the right thing, but they're not enabled to do the work appropriately, and they have been in that place for such a long time, and they've been coming up against the same obstacles year in, year out. So I think if we need to use any example, it needs to be CETA to demonstrate where centralized procurement doesn't work. Thank you.
Thanks, Santi.
And I think, Sean, that the points that Santi made are those are the points. Those are exactly the things that need to be on the table when we have this conversation. And I worry that we're not going to have this conversation. We're going to basically fall into this new regime. And it's going to, it's going to, I think, close the door to much more exciting, much more innovative opportunities to address objectives in a way that I think we shouldn't miss this opportunity. I mean, there are fascinating things happening around the world. Just dynamic purchasing systems, for example. Why are we not looking at that? Why are we still stuck in this old, transversal contracting to me is just such an anachronism. It's an old state tender board way of thinking. Let's just get rid of it. Let's just shelve it. And we talk about strategic procurement. What is it that we want to achieve? Okay, this is what we want to achieve. There are different types of commodities, there are different strategies, and what are the tools we need to get there? And then we look around for the best options that would be fit for purpose in our system. And then we can have a proper conversation. And I get it that we can't have that conversation at the level of the bill. Sure. I mean, there's no way we can have this engagement at the level of drafting a statute. But what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't be drafting a statute that's going to close the door to that conversation, which we can have, for example, at the level of regulation making. So I mean, I would be desperately pleading for us to say, okay, if we're going to go for this very broad framework statute, let's then do that. Let's then just have the broad framework, but let's commit to having proper engagements before we finalize the detail on anything. And that's an ongoing process. It's not a once-off, right? It's not that we say, okay, we're just going to do this once and then we're going to have a set of regulations for 20 years. No, we can have different sets of regulations over time. But what I think we do need to do is to all commit that that's always going to be a collaborative process. And I don't see that at the moment in the bill, and that worries me.
Prof, just in the last minute, if somebody wants to participate and contribute, you and Sophie Williams have set up a structure and a process. Could you just share a little bit more about that and what can be done?
Thanks, Sean. Yes, so I mean, our strategy and very much, I mean, in partnership with you and many others, is to try and just create, let's call it a forum, a national forum, a platform where we can have these conversations. We can physically get together in a room and have conversations. We've started now with a 2-day workshop in February, very broad, and we are narrowing it down over time. We're doing a lot of offline work at the moment, and we will have another one on July, and you've heard it here first because I've just yesterday made the booking. The 21st of July will be the next workshop. You'll get an invite very soon from my office, and we will have another 1-day, full-day workshop in Gauteng to just talk again through all of this. In the meantime, a lot of offline work is happening. Anyone is welcome to join. It's complete open house. Just visit our website or send me or Sean an email. We'll point you in the right direction. And we hope that this is going to become a permanent platform or a permanent forum where we simply really workshop particular issues. So let's take the example we've just had. It would be great if we can spend 2 hours, 3 hours a morning, whatever, sitting together and thinking about some form of centralized procurement. What is its role? What might be the modalities that can work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then pull from that the rules we need, the systems we need, the capacity we need, best case studies, blah, 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 all of that. So that is the initiative that we're driving. And we are very adamant that we are not trying to, take anyone's place. We're not trying to step on anyone's toes. We want to just be collaborative. We just want to say, let's do this together. Let's not try and do this one person in one office, because it's only if we come together that we can get it right. So that's, completely open door policy. So that's what we're doing. We hope to, now that we're starting to see an actual version of the bill, and hopefully we'll see a formal one soon, to feed that directly into our process so that we also can start to talk about actual provisions and say, okay, so this is what's now on the table. How can it work? Do we need to tweak it? Or what do we need to add to this to make it work? As Okkert has also said, we need to be quite clear that even if this bill in its current version is accepted, passed, signed by the president, the real work is going to be in drafting the regulations. And that's still, I understand that is already starting to happen, but that mountain that Okkert referred to, we will still have to climb. And I really think that we can all make a contribution in drafting those regulations. There's no reason that Treasury should do it on their own. We can assist them, we can help. And that's what we're really trying to do. So, open invitation, send me an email. I'm very easy to find. Just Google me, or, go to Sean's platform, or go to the university. I'm at Stellenbosch University, as you can see behind me. Go to our website. You'll easily find me. Drop me a line. I'll add you to our list, and you are more than welcome to join our conversations.
Prof, always great to have you join us. Thank you. Thanks for your insights. I know you did say that you had an 11 o'clock commitment. We've just gone past that.
It's fine. They can wait a bit for me, so it's fine.
So thank you. Thank you. Are you inviting any last minute comments then? Any last minute questions?
Yeah, sure. Let me hang on a bit.
Any Sanele?
Yeah, very interesting discussion, Sean. You know, as the colleagues are engaging, something is coming on my mind. That's the collaboration in this document. I don't know how far does it go, because you look at the Competitions Commission, they introduced a document called Procurement Guidelines. And they're advocating for what Prof is actually saying, the strategic procurement, and to try and do away with those long-term transversal contracts where you lock service providers for more than 12 months, 3 years, because you're also limiting the competition, you're limiting other possible growth on those emerging service providers that are there. So it means in that environment, in those commodities that are there in the transversal contracts, if you lock them for 3 years, the other guys must wait for 3 years. Because remember, as government, we are the biggest spender. So we can't shy away from that fact.
Yeah.
Now, that collaboration that I'm worried about, if it's there in any case, because I would think as public procurement is the biggest lever of economy and, you know, driving empowerment, you'd have people, organizations like, you know, Competitions Commission forming parts of this process. You know, that is actually my worry, but I thought, let me put it out there and you can engage on that. Thanks, Sean.
Good one. Sanele, we've got to get you up to Gauteng next time.
Yeah, absolutely, Sanele. You need to be in the room. So, colleagues, I've just shared my screen. Sean can I'm not sure if you can see it.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Zoom always throws me a bit. So you can see the URL there at the top, africanprocurementlaw.org. And on the landing page, you will see that it's the first item there. And there's a click here for more details. And when you go to that link, it'll give you what we've done up till now, what is the broad background, but it'll also very importantly give you a link to a form that you can fill in. And if you fill in that form, it comes to my office and we add you to the list and you'll get all the notifications. So those of you that's not on our list yet, you are more than welcome to go to the website and join us.
Thank you. Any other comments? Prof, thank you. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
The discussion will continue, and yes, for those who have not got the draft, it's been shared with your DGs. It has been shared with the different provincial treasuries. Get hold of them, ask them for it, and we're looking forward to seeing the next step, and if it does get tabled at Parliament. And it'll be a big milestone if that does happen. But if not, then this debate and the discussion is continued. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks, Sean.